I'll answer the question. You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth!
So, Doc, we've been having some conversations for the past few weeks, and today you have a theory that there's an upside down nature to the comic book industry as it is currently constructed and being operated. And I don't know, we thought we would talk about this. So you would think that the indie comics would be where a lot of the experimental stuff was happening, where a lot of newer creators were cutting their teeth, learning their craft, honing their skills as they develop themselves up to the big two, work with some of the more known characters, stuff that's a little bit more accessible to the mainstream audience. And it's kind of backwards right now. It feels like, especially Marvel are hiring a lot of creators like a Tini Howard, Leah Williams. There's Matthew Rosenberg to exclusive contracts before they are ready. So we're getting a lot of people learning their craft at Marvel, while the higher tier creators, even at DC and Marvel, move over to the indies and start making their own IP that's more accessible to the wider audience.
Yeah. Throughout the decades, there was always kind of this symbiotic relationship between both in the progress of people's careers, as well as the quality and the type of product that companies were putting out, and it all made sense. The indie stuff did more niche idea, randomness, and with smaller target demographics, but was also done by lower tier artists that hadn't really cut their teeth yet and were working their way up. Whereas the big two were publishing fair for the most normie of normie audiences that just has the most mass appeal. And with the biggest name characters, and then you would make the most money because you were selling the most product to the most people. It all made sense. And somewhere along the line, it started getting, we discussed this with the way that people's career trajectories are. And we've kind of hinted at this also in, the way that the companies are publishing stuff and targeting their books. But I don't think we've ever really put it all together in this way, because it seems like now those creators that have now built their name at a Marvel and a DC, people like Scott Snyder, people like Gary Frank, Jeff Johns,
Brubaker.
Yeah. And they build their audience and then they go over to indies. And additionally, they're trying, the stuff that they're making over there, if you actually pick it up and read it, it's really normie kind of fair. Like what Donny Cates is doing on Crossover is the most normie of normie stuff that you could imagine for superhero comics that should have the widest possible appeal to readers. So they're still, those mainstream creators are still creating mainstream product, except for they're no longer doing it with mainstream characters on mainstream publishers. Now the mainstream publishers they're producing these books for these micro demographics. We like to joke that you have I think, what was it that you and Aaron, when you guys were talking about some of the stuff that was coming out from crowdfunding the other day, a lesbian bike riding anthology. That's the kind of stuff that you normally see on Kickstarter. Now you're seeing that at Marvel, not exactly, obviously, but stuff with a very, very obviously small target demographic. And you're doing that with the biggest possible mainstream creations. And that doesn't make any damn sense.
No, they're cutting off their nose to spite their face. I know what you're talking about. There's a creator out there, his name's Kieran Gill.
Yes.
Done some really cool stuff. Did a really great Darth Vader run, if you haven't read that. Right now, he's writing Eternals at Marvel. Not
Yeah.
exactly the most accessible character universe as far as Marvel superheroes go. But then when you go and look what he's doing outside of Marvel, he's got, he's done that Uber series, which is like a World War II alternate future.
Yeah.
Those have been big on streaming. Look at the Man in the High Castle. He's got Die, which is like a fantasy Dungeons and Dragons inspired fantasy universe. Those are really popular. Even Once in Future, like Arthurian legend, inspired sci-fi. Things like that, they translate. People know the legend of King Arthur. People know what World War II is. They've seen alternate futures. They know what Dungeons and Dragons and fantasy is. So he's making these stories that are accessible to a much larger audience than even what he's able to do at Marvel at this moment. It's very strange.
It is, and you hear it a lot coming out from the big two of books that have they're poorly received. Books like America Chavez or Miss Marvel or Captain Marvel. You hear
Miss
a lot.
Marvel was hot when it was initially launched.
Oh yeah,
it cooled off after about 18 months.
Yeah, but the current run. But you hear a lot, it's not for you. See, that's something that 20 years ago, Marvel never would have said, because they would have said, our idea is to produce, that's the point of being the big two, being the mainstream publisher. You're supposed to be making stuff that is for everybody, not for a niche target demographic. That's the problem.
If you're not making comic books for Eric Breen or Pele or even Jimmy from Comic Works, people that spend lots of money and lots of time reading comic books, who are you writing your comic book for?
Yes, you're writing it for a micro percentage of the population. It shouldn't be this hard. This doesn't need to be this complicated, but the industry has made it complicated by aiming big product or what should be.
I thought this is what I thought was going on for a while. I don't even know if I'm correct anymore. I thought for a while, like the editorial staffs, maybe at Marvel or DC, were getting jealous that people on indie books were getting all the awards like recognition. They said, you know what, we can do, Eisner bait at Marvel too, or we can do Ringo bait at Marvel too. Let's go make some really niche stuff that we'll get some praise for. And I think they probably got that a few times, and they said that's what all of our lines should be, instead of thinking, but is this accessible to everybody? We might get an award for this, but is it going to make money? And I think that's where at least that was one of my theories. I don't even know if I'm right anymore. They might just be sabotaging themselves.
That would actually be a more reasonable explanation, other than the fact that they're just hiring people that they like. I think the problem is a lot of your editorial staff, that's the stuff that they like. They grew up on these weird niche, like Fantagraphics type books that didn't get super big acclaim, but they loved them. They grew up on those, so that when they got hired at Marvel, they just decided, hey, you know what? All these things that didn't get big sales and big appeal, I want to make Marvel into that, because if we do those same ideas under the Marvel name,
it's mainstream.
I will mainstream the stuff that I like. That's
and
what
it's
it
crazy
felt like.
They didn't realize is for Grant Morrison to be able to do those projects, they needed to go do All-Star Superman.
Yeah, he needed to go
that's
do.
That's how you fund those projects.
Exactly. He gets to make C Guy because he gets to also write, 52 and Countdown at the same time.
Yeah.
So
you gotta pay the bills first, and then you can do your passion projects on the side.
Exactly. And I think a lot of these editors grew up thinking that this stuff, this niche indie stuff, is what I want to see selling in the market. So if I do it under the Marvel banner, get the Marvel name on it and get the Marvel sales. They didn't realize that the problem was that, Captain Marvel or Iron Man or X-Men, their sales aren't guaranteed. And we've watched, this happen market wide as sales go down as a result. So now all you're going to do is you end up with, crazy niche, small target demographic idea in mainstream book. All you're going to end up doing is getting crazy niche, weird, small demographic sales on mainstream book.
Yeah, it's something we've been talking about on our Comics Writing 101. We did an entire 1 hour lesson on genre. And the main point was, once you decide on your genre dictates your audience, which also dictates your audience expectations. If you're going to write a sci-fi book, they're going to expect maybe some new planets, some spaceships, some type of technology they've never seen. But there's also a nomenclature that comes along with it. You don't need a new term for warp speed, even if you want to call it something else. You got to call it warp speed so they know what you're talking about. If you want to go do fantasy books, they're regular tropes that you're going to see in those things that make the beats familiar and everything. If you go into an Iron Man book and you're not getting your familiar superhero beats to a superhero story, people are going to tune out because they came for the superhero story. They did not come for the, weird, feminist icon like
lecture,
from Hellcat.
Yes,
it's off-putting. Maybe once or twice it's okay, but if that's what the book is, people are going to tune out because that's not what they paid for.
I like to say, a thing is what it is. Like, a superhero comic is a superhero comic. You can change what you put in that superhero comic, and all you're doing is changing it into something else that is no longer a superhero comic. A is A. It will always be what it is. The universe has, and all of the readership across the globe has decided these are the things that I have an expectation are going to be in my superhero book. If I don't get them, or if I get something else and you slap a superhero book title and name on it, it doesn't make that a superhero book. It means you baited and switched me. That's all it means. And once you get baited and switched enough, you leave.
Absolutely. We're definitely seeing that. The numbers are so weird to look at right now, Doc. I know Comic-Con is doing the best that they can with their guesstimations. I don't trust them at this point. I've seen I've been given some limited access to behind the scenes numbers of actual sales data. They do not line up whatsoever with what I've seen on Comic-Con. In fact, they're not even hitting the low end estimates that I saw on Comic-Con. They were far under.
Yeah.
So I don't even know. It's kind of a weird spot. I don't have a good idea what the sales right now are.
I don't think anybody does. I mean, unless you're actually working at a publisher.
Yeah,
I think that's the only one. Yeah, Diamond knows.
And Lunar know. DC know. Marvel know. Some of the smaller publishers are aware. But there's some dubious numbers coming out there that don't make sense. And it turns out a lot of the times they aren't quite right.
Yeah, and that's not at all surprising to me. We're basically in I guess you could say a blind. We're flying blind. We have been for the last year with numbers, and we probably will be for at least another 6 to 12 months, and then we might start getting. So there's going to be a 2 year.
I don't think Penguin Random House is ever going to publish those numbers.
Probably not. But there's a possibility. But regardless,
I'm with you, Doc. I think it's weird that Jeff Lemire has to go to Dark Horse and create his own Black Hammer superhero universe to write some superhero stories that people might actually like.
Yes, because
he's not really allowed to do it other places anymore.
Yeah, they've taken. I see people talk about how great X-Men is, but they've turned the X-Men into something it isn't, and I think the sales have dropped as a result.
They have dropped. I've seen some of those numbers.
Yeah, and you look at Avengers, and Avengers should be one thing and you're getting something completely different. You're getting forgettable event book now instead of Avengers. Fantastic Four, people have an expectation it be about the family and them doing crazy science adventures. People have an expectation that Captain America is going to, I don't know, be the Captain of America.
There used to be a ladder, Doc. We talked about it before, and you worked your way up to the top, and finally you got that Spider-Man gig, you got that Batman gig that you'd always been dreaming of. And it doesn't really work that way. You get plucked out because you're cheap and affordable. They throw you on to whatever title because there's an opening. You hope that people remember your name, and then you go over to Image or Boom Studios, which is hotter than anything right now, and you have good stories waiting for you that you can actually go tell, because you don't need to go do it on Marvel and DC now. I mean, just look at, James Tynan's on Batman, but look what he's doing over on the indies. He's putting himself in a very envious position as far as making money down the road.
Yes, you are right. And it is a ladder, and that kind of got replaced by a pegboard, but also that was kind of a pyramid. There was 1,000 artists at the bottom that were all working their way in. And over the years, kind of like sports, from Little League all the way up to the pros, and Marvel and DC were the pro level. So they were the best of the best, at least that wanted to be in superhero comics, obviously. And then the industry itself functioned like a funnel where all the books that are, the Marvel and the DC, they were the ones that brought all the readers in because they were mainstream normie of normie fare. And, Archie as well. And they bring hundreds and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of readers in, and they funnel them down. And as you got, you started by picking your comics up in the at the pharmacy on a spinner rack. You eventually found a comic shop, and as you were buying more and more comics, you would find the niche indie stuff that, ooh, this is good. I want to try this. So the idea was that the big two were normie stuff that funneled people down to that lesbian bike riding anthology. Because otherwise, there's no way to get into it.
No, it's definitely a little bit backwards. There are some people that they've identified the system and they're using it to their advantage. Some of the people I would name would be Jeff Lemire, Kieran Gillen, Scott Snyder, Ed Brubaker. You mentioned Donny Cates out there, and a lot of people aren't understanding it at this moment. They're going to be wishing that they had moved over and took advantage of the system and started making some IP, because streaming isn't getting any smaller. People still need to make shows. Look what Mark Millar's got. He just has Jupiter's Legacy coming out this week. Looks like it's huge.
Mark Millar's, he's going to give you a call at some point if you're an artist, and you better answer that phone because you're going to get a nice residual check.
Yeah, he pays. You're going to get paid what you're worth.
Yep.
That's a big problem. I'm going to be talking with Aaron Sparrow about that actually here, I believe I don't know, early in the week. Aaron and I are going to talk about that as well. But I know it's a mad world out there, Doc. We've been talking around it. We kind of tied some things together we've been discussing here for the past few weeks. Do you have anything else you want to say about the upside down nature of how comic books are operating right now?
No, just look, let the industry, let it be what it is, what it's always been. Let the mainstream, everybody knows it properties funnel your crazy, weird indie, all the audience into your crazy indie stuff. Don't make that the crazy indie stuff. Otherwise, nobody starts reading them. Comic book at indie publishers in order to, you just end up, there used to be kind of like this pyramid to your career, and like a funnel to the way that
there used to be a ladder, Doc. We talked about it already, and you'd climb the ladder, and at the top was your Marvel job or that DC job that you always wanted.
Hold on.